Why are we so quick to believe a powerful woman is a poisoner? Is it because poison is seen as a secret weapon, something used when you cannot fight with a sword? Or is it just an easy way to tear down a queen who holds too much power? What if the stories are true? What if the person meant to be a mother to the nation was secretly a killer, using a drop of liquid in a cup of wine to shape empires and silence her enemies? Number 15, did perfumed gloves end a kingdom's hope? Jeanne d'Albret, Queen of Navarre, died in Paris in June 1572. She was 44 years old. Her death came just days after she purchased a pair of perfumed gloves from René Bianchi, the personal perfumer to the French Queen Mother, Catherine de Medici. The official cause of death was a respiratory illness, but the autopsy report conveniently failed to examine her head, where poison was often thought to leave its mark. Within weeks of her death, the streets of Paris would run red with the blood of thousands of Protestants during the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Catherine de Medici is perhaps the most famous queen ever accused of poisoning. The story of her life is tangled with political murder, religious war, and a reputation for dabbling in the dark arts. She was an Italian in the French court, which already made her an outsider. She was the mother of 3 French kings, and she held immense power as a regent and advisor. People feared her, and when people fear a powerful woman, they often reach for the accusation of poison. The case of Jeanne d'Albret is the most famous one, laid at Catherine's door. Jeanne was a formidable woman herself. She was the leader of the French Protestant faction, the Huguenots. She was intelligent, stubborn, and deeply religious. Catherine, a Catholic, was trying to broker peace by arranging a marriage between her daughter, Marguerite de Valois, and Johnny's son, the future King Henry IV of France. This was a hugely important political match, meant to end decades of religious civil war. Jeanne traveled to Paris to negotiate the terms of the wedding. She did not trust Catherine. She wrote letters home complaining about the decadent and corrupt French court. She argued fiercely with Catherine over the details of the marriage ceremony. Then, after agreeing to the terms and doing some shopping, she fell ill and died. The timing was almost too perfect for those who wanted to believe in a conspiracy. The leader of the Protestants was removed from the board right before a major event that would bring thousands of her followers to the hostile city of Paris. The story quickly spread that Catherine had ordered her perfumer, a fellow Italian, to poison a pair of gloves. The poison would be absorbed through the skin, leaving little trace. It was a neat, clean, and terrifyingly plausible story. It painted Catherine as a cunning, ruthless killer who used feminine items like perfume and gloves as weapons. But is the evidence actually convincing? Let's look at it. The biggest piece of evidence is the timing and the motive. Catherine certainly benefited from Jeanne's death. Jeanne was a difficult political opponent. With her gone, her more pliable son Henry would go through with the wedding, and the Huguenot leadership would be temporarily stunned. The connection to her personal perfumer is also suspicious. René Bianchi was known as an expert in his field, a field that at the time was closely associated with alchemy and the creation of strange concoctions, including poisons. The counter-argument, however, is also strong. Jeanne d'Albret had been in poor health for years. Her own doctors had documented her chronic respiratory problems, likely tuberculosis. A long and stressful journey to Paris, followed by tense negotiations, could easily have weakened her enough for the disease to finally take her. The official autopsy, conducted by several physicians, did conclude that she died of natural causes, noting abscesses on her lungs. The claim that her head was not examined comes from later, highly biased Protestant accounts written after the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. These accounts were designed to paint Catherine de Medici as a monster. They needed a villain to blame for the slaughter, and the Italian queen who dabbled in astrology and employed a perfumer was the perfect candidate. The story of the poison gloves became a powerful piece of propaganda. It explained the death of their beloved leader and justified their hatred for the French crown. Catherine's reputation didn't help her. She surrounded herself with astrologers like Nostradamus and was fascinated by what was then called the occult. To her enemies, this interest in secret knowledge was just one step away from an interest in secret poisons. But for Catherine, it may have simply been a way to try and find some control and guidance in a chaotic world where her children's thrones were constantly under threat. She was a master of political maneuvering, but that doesn't automatically make her a murderer. The evidence for the poison gloves is almost entirely circumstantial, built on suspicion, timing, and the testimony of her sworn enemies. It's a great story, but it might just be that a story. Number 14 was the Borgia poison a myth or a method. At a dinner hosted by his own father, the Pope, Cesare Borgia was said to have accidentally poisoned himself with the same drugged wine intended for another guest. The Borgia family had a special poison. They called it cantarella. It was a white powder, tasteless, and derived from arsenic. Lucrezia Borgia, Cesare's sister, was often depicted as the one who administered the poison, sometimes from a hollow ring she wore on her finger. Lucrezia Borgia, her name is synonymous with poison. She is the ultimate femme fatale of the Renaissance, a beautiful woman who left a trail of dead husbands and lovers in her wake. The stories about her and her family, her father, Pope Alexander VI, and her ruthless brother Cesare, have been told for 500 years. They are tales of ambition, corruption, and murder, often carried out with a drop of cantarella. The Borgias rose to power in Italy during a time of incredible political turmoil. The major city-states were constantly at war, and the papacy was just as much a political and military power as it was a religious one. To survive and expand their power, the Borgias used every tool at their disposal: political alliances, strategic marriages, and, according to their enemies, assassination. Lucrezia was one of those tools. She was married off 3 times for political gain. Her first marriage was annulled on humiliating grounds. Her second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, was attacked on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica and later finished off in his room while he was recovering. The man widely believed to have ordered this was her own brother Cesare. This is one of the few deaths directly linked to her, where the evidence of foul play by her family is strong. But was Lucrezia involved, or was she just a pawn, horrified by her brother's actions? The rumors of poison often centered on the lavish banquets hosted by the Borgias. Cardinals and noblemen who stood in the family's way would be invited to dinner. They would be treated to the finest food and wine. Days later, they would fall ill and die. Their wealth and property would then be seized by the Borgia family. It was a convenient and effective way to fund their ambitions and eliminate rivals. The primary source for many of these stories was a man named Johann Burchard, the Pope's master of ceremonies. He kept a detailed diary, and he did not like the Borgias. He recorded every rumor, every scandal, every suspicious death. He wrote about cardinals dying suddenly after dining with the Pope. He helped create the legend of the Borgia poison. But here's the problem. Burchard was a rival and a gossip. Much of what he wrote was secondhand, and nearly every other account of the Borgias' poisonings comes from families who were their sworn political enemies, families like the Orsini and the Sforza. They had every reason to spread the most damaging rumors possible about the Borgias to undermine their power. Let's look at Lucrezia herself. The image of her as a poisoner really took hold centuries later, thanks to a play by Victor Hugo and an opera by Donizetti. They portrayed her as a tragic monster trapped in a web of her family's crimes. In reality, there is not a single piece of credible first-hand evidence that Lucrezia Borgia ever poisoned anyone. No witness ever came forward to say they saw her do it. No letter was ever found where she discussed it. After she escaped the influence of her father and brother and became the Duchess of Ferrara through her third marriage, her life changed completely. She was known as a respected and pious ruler. She was a patron of the arts and dedicated herself to charity and raising her children. This doesn't sound like a cold-blooded killer. It sounds more like a woman who survived a traumatic and dangerous youth and was trying to build a new life for herself. So, was the Borgia poison real? It's very likely that Cesare Borgia and Pope Alexander VI did use poison. Arsenic was a known poison at the time and was difficult to detect. It fits their pattern of ruthless behavior. But the idea of Lucrezia as the one holding the poison ring is almost certainly a myth. She was a valuable political asset, but her real power was in her bloodline and her ability to secure alliances through marriage, not in a secret vial of cantarella. The legend was more useful to her enemies than the poison ever was to her. Number 13, did a Roman empress perfect the poisoned fig? The Emperor Augustus, the first and perhaps greatest of all Roman emperors, died at the age of 75. The official story is that he died of old age and illness. But a darker rumor, recorded by the historian Cassius Dio, suggests something else. In his final days, Augustus had apparently grown suspicious of his wife, Livia Drusilla. He began to eat only figs that he picked himself from a certain tree in the garden. The story goes that Livia coated the figs with poison while they were still on the tree. So, when Augustus picked his safe fruit, he was actually poisoning himself with his own hands. Livia Drusilla was the original Empress of Rome. She was married to Augustus for 51 years. She was beautiful, intelligent, and intensely ambitious, not just for herself, but for her son from a previous marriage, Tiberius. And she wanted Tiberius to succeed Augustus as emperor. The only problem was the long line of other people who stood in his way. Over the decades, a suspicious number of these people died. First, there was Marcellus, Augustus's nephew and chosen heir. He died suddenly of a fever at age 19. Then there were Augustus's two grandsons, Gaius and Lucius Caesar, whom he had adopted as his sons and successors. Lucius died of a sudden illness in Gaul. 2 years later, Gaius died from a battle wound that refused to heal. Finally, there was Agrippa Postumus, Augustus's last remaining grandson, who was exiled and then executed just days after Augustus's death. With every single one of these deaths, the path became clearer for Livia's son, Tiberius, and with every death, the rumors about Livia grew louder. The historian Tacitus, writing a century later, presents Livia as a cunning and ruthless manipulator who secretly orchestrated the removal of all her rivals. He paints her as the ultimate evil stepmother, clearing the way for her own child. The story of the poisoned figs is the culmination of this dark reputation. It's an incredibly clever story. It shows Livia not just as a poisoner, but as a master of psychological manipulation, turning the emperor's own precautions against him. It's a testament to her supposed genius for intrigue. But is there any real proof? No. Just like with Catherine de Medici and Lucrezia Borgia, the evidence is purely circumstantial and comes from historians writing long after the events, often with a political axe to grind. Tacitus, for example, was writing during a later dynasty and was critical of the imperial system that Augustus and Livia had created. Portraying the first empress as a serial poisoner was a good way to criticize the very foundations of the empire. Let's consider the alternatives. Rome was a city with poor sanitation and limited medical knowledge. Young men died from sudden fevers and infections all the time. Marcellus could have died from any number of diseases. Lucius and Gaius were on military campaigns in foreign lands, exposed to unfamiliar illnesses and the dangers of war. Their deaths, while convenient for Livia, were not statistically unusual for the time. And what about Augustus himself? He was 75 years old and had been in poor health for much of his life. He was ready to die. His last words to those gathered around his bed were, "Have I played the part well? Then applaud as I exit." This doesn't sound like a man who was tricked into poisoning himself. It sounds like a man who knew his time was up. Livia was undoubtedly a powerful and influential woman. She was Augustus's closest advisor and confidante for half a century. She managed the imperial household, which was a massive operation, and she owned and managed her own properties and businesses, making her independently wealthy. She was a political player in a world dominated by men. This alone was enough to make people suspicious of her. The rumors of poison served a purpose. They were a way for her male contemporaries to explain her power. She wasn't smart or politically skilled. She was just a sneaky woman using women's weapons like poison. The story of Livia, the poisoner, is a powerful one, but it's likely a reflection of Roman society's fear of powerful women rather than a reflection of Livia's actual actions. She secured her son's place on the throne, not through a poisoned fig, but through decades of loyalty, intelligence, and political skill. Number 12, did a plate of mushrooms secure an empire? The Roman Emperor Claudius died in 54 AD. He was 63 years old. He loved mushrooms, and his wife, Agrippina the Younger, knew this. The story told by multiple Roman historians like Tacitus and Suetonius is that she served him a plate of his favorite dish, but one of the mushrooms was laced with a deadly poison. When the poison didn't work fast enough, Agrippina and her co-conspirators had a doctor pretend to help Claudius vomit by tickling his throat with a feather. The feather, too, was dipped in poison. Agrippina the Younger is one of the most formidable women in Roman history. She was the great-granddaughter of Augustus, the sister of the infamous Emperor Caligula, the wife of the Emperor Claudius, and the mother of the Emperor Nero. Her entire life was a masterclass in political survival and ambition. Her ultimate goal was to see her son Nero on the throne. When she married Claudius, who was also her uncle, she became empress. She was not a quiet, submissive wife. She was granted the title of Augusta, an honor Livia had only received after Augustus's death. Her portrait appeared on coins. She was, for all intents and purposes, a co-ruler, but she knew that Claudius had a son of his own, Britannicus. As long as Britannicus was alive, Nero's position as heir was not secure. According to the ancient sources, Agrippina decided to act. She needed to get Claudius out of the way before he changed his mind and favored his biological son over her son, his stepson. So she turned to a well-known poison expert named Locusta. Locusta was a woman from Gaul who had become a professional poisoner for hire in Rome. Agrippina supposedly procured a fast-acting poison from Locusta, and with the help of Claudius's food taster, Helotus, administered it in a dish of mushrooms. The details provided by the historians are incredibly specific. They name the people involved. They describe the method, the initial dose in the food, the second dose on the feather. They even describe the symptoms Claudius suffered. This level of detail makes the story seem very credible. The motive is clear: she wanted power for her son. The means were available. Professional poisoners existed in Rome. The opportunity was there as his wife. She controlled his household and his food. Immediately after Claudius's death, Agrippina moved quickly. She kept his death a secret for several hours, using the time to secure the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard for Nero. She had Britannicus and his sisters kept out of sight. By the time Claudius's death was announced to the public, Nero was already being hailed as the new emperor. The plan, if it was a plan, worked perfectly. But is the story true? It's almost universally accepted by the ancient historians. Tacitus, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, they all report it as fact. However, they were all writing 50 to 70 years after the event. And they were all part of the senatorial class, which generally disliked the emperors and their powerful wives. Agrippina, with her public ambition and refusal to stay in the background, was a prime target for their criticism. There are some dissenting voices. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing a bit earlier, mentions the rumor but doesn't state it as a certainty. Some modern historians have suggested that Claudius, who was an elderly man with a number of health problems and a history of strokes, might have simply died of natural causes. A sudden stroke could have produced symptoms similar to poisoning. The story of the murder could have been invented later, perhaps by Nero himself. Nero and his mother had a terrible falling out. He eventually had her murdered. What better way to justify killing your own mother than to claim she was a murderer herself who had killed your stepfather? It would paint him as an agent of justice, not a paranoid tyrant. The problem with this theory is that the story of the poisoning seems to have been circulating from the very beginning. It wasn't something invented years later. The philosopher Seneca, who was Nero's tutor, wrote a satire shortly after Claudius's death that openly mocked the dead emperor and hinted at foul play. In this case, the evidence seems to lean heavily towards guilt. The motive was strong. The execution of the plan was flawless. The succession of Nero was seamless, and the ancient sources, for once, are nearly unanimous. While we can never be 100% certain, the case against Agrippina the Younger is one of the most convincing in the long history of rumored royal poisoners. She wasn't just trying to survive, she was trying to build a dynasty, and a plate of mushrooms may have been her most important tool. Rule number 11, did an Egyptian queen test poisons on prisoners? Before she took her own life, Cleopatra VII of Egypt supposedly conducted a series of scientific experiments. She wanted to find the quickest and most painless poison available. According to ancient sources like Plutarch, she tested a variety of deadly toxins on condemned prisoners. She watched as they suffered and died, carefully observing the effects of each poison. She concluded that the bite of an asp was the best method, as it seemed to bring on a peaceful sleep without convulsions or pain. Cleopatra is one of the most famous women in all of history. We remember her for her love affairs with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, her political ambition, and her dramatic death. But we often overlook her reputation as an expert in poisons. In the Roman world, Egypt was seen as a land of ancient magic and secret knowledge. Its queen, Cleopatra, was believed to be a master of these arts, including the art of toxicology. Her connection to poison goes beyond her own death. She was a ruler in a dangerous world, the last of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Her own family history was filled with murder and betrayal. Her younger sister, Arsinoe IV, was a rival for the throne. Cleopatra had her executed on the steps of a temple in Ephesus, an order carried out by Mark Antony. While this was a public execution, not a poisoning, it shows her capacity for ruthless action when her power was threatened. The rumors of her poisoning her enemies are less substantiated, but were widespread. It was said that she had a collection of poisons hidden within hollow hair combs and other personal ornaments. She was the ruler of a kingdom, and poison was a common tool of statecraft in the Hellenistic world. It's not hard to believe she would have had poisons at her disposal and known how to use them. The story of her experiments on prisoners is particularly chilling. It portrays her not just as a user of poison, but as a cold, calculating scientist of death. She wasn't just looking for a weapon, she was looking for the best weapon, the most efficient and humane way to die. This speaks to a mind that was both practical and deeply engaged with the physical world. She wasn't some distant queen giving orders, she was hands-on, observing the results herself. This aligns with what we know about Cleopatra's intellect. She was not just a beautiful seductress, she was highly educated. She was the only Ptolemaic ruler to learn the Egyptian language. She studied mathematics, philosophy, and astronomy. She even wrote a book on cosmetics and remedies, some of which may have included toxic ingredients. Her interest in chemistry and biology was real. So, an interest in the effects of various toxins on the human body is not out of character. When the time came for her own end, after her defeat by Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, she had a decision to make. She could be captured and paraded through the streets of Rome in a humiliating triumphal procession, or she could take her own life. She chose death. The famous story is that she had an asp, a type of cobra, smuggled to her in a basket of figs. The snake bit her, and she died. But even this famous story is debated. Some modern toxicologists argue that a cobra bite would have been a slow and painful death, not the peaceful drift into sleep that Plutarch described. They suggest she may have used a different method, perhaps a prepared cocktail of poisons. One theory is that she used a mixture of hemlock, wolfsbane, and opium, which would have been much more reliable and faster acting. If she had indeed experimented with poisons, she would have known exactly what to use. Whether the story of the experiments is literally true or not, it tells us something important about how she was perceived. Both her enemies and her admirers saw her as a woman of immense knowledge and power. The Romans, who both feared and were fascinated by her, saw her as an exotic Eastern sorceress. The story of her poison experiments was a way to explain her power and her defiance. Even in defeat, she was in control. She chose the manner of her own death, based on scientific research. It was her final act of royal authority. Number 10 was China's only female emperor, a killer. In 654 AD, the infant daughter of a high-ranking concubine named Wu Zetian died in her crib. The baby's mother, Wu, claimed that the Empress Wang, the emperor's primary wife, had been the last person in the room. The Emperor Gaozong, enraged and grieving, believed her. Empress Wang was deposed, and Wu Zetian took her place. A few years later, Wu's eldest son, Li Hong, the crown prince, died suddenly at the age of 23. He had been in good health, but had recently displeased his mother by disagreeing with her on matters of state. Wu Zetian was said to have poisoned him. Wu Zetian is the only woman in Chinese history to have ruled as emperor in her own right. Her rise from a low-ranking concubine to the absolute ruler of China is a story of breathtaking ambition and, according to her detractors, extreme ruthlessness. The accusations of poisoning followed her throughout her career, painting a picture of a woman who would stop at nothing to gain and hold power. The story of her infant daughter is the most shocking. Traditional histories, written by Confucian scholars who were hostile to the idea of a woman ruling, tell a brutal story. They claim that Wu Zetian herself suffocated her own child and then framed Empress Wang for the murder. It was a calculated, heartless move designed to eliminate her chief rival for the emperor's affection and to secure the position of empress for herself. Is this story believable? It is certainly possible. The stakes at the imperial court were incredibly high, and Empress Wang was childless, and Wu Zetian had given the emperor sons. The death of the infant girl created an emotional crisis that Wu Zetian could exploit perfectly. The emperor, overwhelmed by grief and manipulated by Wu, turned against his wife. From a purely political perspective, the act was brutally effective. However, it's also possible that the story is a complete fabrication, a piece of character assassination written by her enemies. Infant mortality was tragically high in the ancient world. The baby could have died from any number of natural causes, perhaps even sudden infant death syndrome. It would have been easy for Wu Zetian's political opponents to take this tragic event and twist it into a story of monstrous ambition. The Confucian historians who wrote the official records after her reign had a strong ideological reason to portray her in the worst possible light. A woman who usurped the throne had to be unnatural, a monster who would even kill her own child. The death of her son, Li Hong, is another key event. Li Hong was the crown prince, and by all accounts, he was a capable and respected young man. He often disagreed with his mother's growing political influence. He argued for more humane treatment of his relatives, whom Wu had exiled. Then he died suddenly while visiting his parents. The official cause was given as consumption tuberculosis, but rumors immediately spread that Wu had poisoned him to remove a potential challenge to her power. He was simply too independent for her liking. Later, another of her sons, Li Xian, was made crown prince. He, too, proved to be too independent. He was accused of treason, deposed, and forced to take his own life. While this wasn't poison, it was part of a clear pattern. Anyone who stood in Wu Zetian's way, even her own children, was removed. The Wu Zetian's reign was a complex period. She was a skilled and effective ruler in many ways. She reformed the civil service, promoted talented people from lower classes, and expanded the empire. But she also ruled through a network of secret police and was known for her paranoia and her purges of aristocratic rivals. In this atmosphere of fear and intrigue, accusations of poison were inevitable. Poison is the ultimate weapon of the court conspirator. It's secret, deniable, and terrifying. For Wu Zetian's enemies, it was the perfect crime to accuse her of. It fit their narrative of a woman who subverted the natural order through treachery and dark deeds. The evidence for any specific poisoning is thin, based on rumor and the biased accounts of hostile historians. But the pattern of convenient deaths around her is undeniable. Whether she used poison or simply took advantage of timely tragedies, Wu Zetian showed that she was willing to sacrifice anything and anyone for the dragon throne. Number 9. Did a Frankish queen use poison as a political tool? A young princess named Galswintha traveled from Spain to marry the Frankish king Chilperic. Her sister Brunhilde was already married to Chilperic's brother King Sigebert. This double marriage was meant to create a powerful alliance, but Chilperic already had a lowborn consort, a former servant named Fredegund. He was infatuated with her. A short time after the wedding, Queen Galswintha was found strangled in her bed. Chilperic quickly married Fredegund, making her the new queen. Everyone, especially Galswintha's sister Brunhilde, believed Fredegund was behind the murder. This act ignited a feud between the two queens that would last for 40 years and tear the Frankish kingdom apart. Fredegund, a queen of the Merovingian Franks in the 6th century, has a reputation for being one of the most brutal and ruthless women in European history. The primary source for her life is the History of the Franks by Gregory of Tours, a bishop who was her contemporary and her enemy. Gregory paints her as a monster who used assassination, both by blade and by poison, as her primary political tool. While the murder of Galswintha was by strangulation, Fredegund was repeatedly accused of using poison against her other enemies. One of her most famous alleged victims was Bishop Praedixtatus of Rouen. He had officiated at the marriage of Fredegund's stepson, Merivech, to the vengeful Queen Brunhilde. This was an act of defiance against Fredegund and her husband. Praetextatus was later stabbed while leading a service in his own cathedral. As he lay dying, he openly accused Fredegund of ordering the attack. Gregory of Tours also tells a chilling story about Fredegund's own daughter, Rigunth. The two had a terrible relationship. One day, Fredegund allegedly lured Rigunth to a large chest filled with treasure. As the princess leaned over to admire the jewels, Fredegund slammed the heavy lid down on her neck, intending to kill her. Servants heard the screams and saved Rigunth. This story, whether true or not, shows the kind of reputation Fredegund had. She was seen as someone capable of even the most unnatural acts. Fredegund's main goal was to ensure that her own son, Cholothar II, would inherit the kingdom. This meant eliminating all rival claimants, primarily the sons and grandsons of her great rival, Queen Brunhilde. Gregory of Tours describes a number of plots where Fredegund sent assassins to kill Brunhilde's relatives. He tells of a cleric sent with a poisoned knife to murder King Childebert II, Brunhilde's son. The plot was discovered, and the assassin was executed. Another story involves 2 daggers soaked in poison. Fredegund supposedly gave these to 2 assassins, instructing them to kill King Guntram, her brother-in-law. Her instructions were chillingly specific. If one assassin failed, the other was to kill him, so the plot could not be traced back to her. This plot also failed. How much of this is true? Gregory of Tours clearly hated Fredegund. He was a supporter of her rivals, and he saw her as an illegitimate, low-born usurper who had corrupted the king. His history is filled with moral judgment. He presents Fredegund as a witch-like figure, a servant of evil. However, the Merovingian period was an exceptionally violent and unstable time. The Frankish kings practiced polygamy, which created a host of wives and sons all competing for power. Assassination was a common political tactic used by everyone, not just Fredegund. She was playing the same brutal game as the men around her, but perhaps she was better at it. She came from nothing, a palace servant who caught the king's eye. She had no powerful family to back her up. Her only security was her own intelligence, her ruthlessness, and the king's affection. To survive and to promote her son, she had to be more ruthless than her high-born rivals like Brunhilde. The accusations of poison are part of this picture. Poison was seen as a cowardly, sneaky weapon often associated with women. By accusing her of using it, her enemies were not just calling her a murderer, they were calling her an unnatural and treacherous woman. But in the violent world of the Frankish court, a vial of poison might have been the most practical weapon a queen could wield. Fredegund outlived all of her enemies and died peacefully in her bed. Her son, Chlothar II, eventually became the sole king of all the Franks, a victory his mother had secured for him through decades of war, intrigue, and quite possibly poison. Number 8. Did an Italian queen bring poison to Poland? In 1551, Barbara Radziwill, the beautiful Queen of Poland and Grand Duchess of Lithuania, died at the age of 30. She had been married to King Sigismund II Augustus for less than a year. Her death was a political victory for her mother-in-law, the powerful Queen Dowager Bona Sforza. Bona had fiercely opposed the marriage from the very beginning. She believed her son had married beneath his station. Rumors flew that the Italian-born Bona Sforza, known for her political maneuvering, had poisoned her young daughter-in-law. Bona Sforza was a major figure in 16th century Eastern Europe. She was an Italian princess from the powerful Sforza family of Milan. When she married King Sigismund I of Poland, she brought with her the culture, art, and political style of the Italian Renaissance. She was highly educated, ambitious, and skilled at managing her finances. She acquired vast amounts of land and wealth, making her one of the most powerful people in the kingdom. She was also a classic controlling mother. She had immense influence over her son Sigismund II Augustus. She expected him to obey her and to make a politically advantageous marriage that would benefit the kingdom and her own power. When he secretly married Barbara Radziwill, a Lithuanian noblewoman he was deeply in love with, Bona was furious. The Polish nobility was also against the marriage. They feared the rise of the Radziwill family. They pressured the king to annul the marriage. But Sigismund Augustus was defiant. He loved Barbara and he fought to have her recognized as queen. He eventually succeeded, and Barbara was crowned Queen of Poland in 1550. But she was already ill. She suffered from a long and painful sickness, and just 5 months after her coronation, she was dead. The suspicion immediately fell on Bona Sforza. The motive was obvious. She hated Barbara and had fought the marriage tooth and nail. Her death removed her rival and opened up the possibility for the king to make a new, more suitable marriage. And Bona was Italian. In the 16th century, there was a widespread stereotype across Europe that Italians, and particularly the Italian nobility, were experts in the art of poison. The stories of families like the Borgias were well known. A powerful Italian queen like Bona Sforza was an easy target for such accusations. The nature of Barbara's illness also fueled the rumors. It was a long, wasting sickness. Her body was covered in painful abscesses. To many, this looked like the slow work of a subtle poison. Some accounts claim that Bona had used her doctors and apothecaries to administer small, untraceable doses of poison to the young queen over a long period. But what is the real evidence? There is none. No deathbed confession, no captured assassin, no letter revealing a plot. The accusations are based entirely on motive and prejudice. Modern medical historians looking at the descriptions of Barbara's symptoms have suggested that she likely died of cancer, probably cervical or ovarian cancer. The symptoms described, abdominal pain, fever, hemorrhaging, and abscesses, are consistent with a late-stage gynecological cancer. In the 16th century, such a disease would have been a mysterious and terrifying death sentence, easily mistaken for the effects of poison. Bona Sforza was certainly a tough and often ruthless politician. She fought hard to protect her power and the interests of the dynasty. She was not a sentimental person. But there is a big difference between being a hard-nosed political operator and being a murderer. The story of her poisoning Barbara Radziwill became a popular legend in Poland, a dramatic tale of a wicked mother-in-law and a tragic young queen. It was a story that helped to tarnish Bona's reputation, especially after she had a major falling out with her son over her vast fortune and political influence. In the end, Bona Sforza herself may have become a victim of the crime she was so often accused of. After her son forced her to return to Italy, she was allegedly poisoned by her own trusted courtier, who was working as an agent for King Philip II of Spain. The Spanish king owed Bona a huge sum of money, and her death conveniently canceled the debt. It is a bitter irony that the queen whose name was so often linked with poison may have met her own end in exactly that way. Number 7. Did Catherine the Great sanction her husband's murder? 6 months after he became Emperor of Russia, Peter III was overthrown in a coup led by his own wife, Catherine. He was arrested and taken to a country estate called Ropsha. 8 days later, he was dead. The official cause of death was given as a severe case of hemorrhoidal colic. But almost no one believed it. A letter, supposedly written by Alexei Orlov, one of the men guarding Peter, confessed to the murder. "We are guilty and deserve to be executed," the letter said, "but how could it have been done when we did not know what we were doing? We were drunk." Catherine the Great's rise to power is a story of incredible audacity. She was a minor German princess brought to Russia to marry the heir to the throne. Her husband, Peter III, was an immature and deeply unpopular ruler. He idolized Russia's enemy, Frederick the Great of Prussia, and offended the powerful Russian Orthodox Church in the military. Catherine, on the other hand, was intelligent and ambitious. She learned the Russian language, converted to the Orthodox faith, and cultivated powerful allies, especially in the military, including the 5 Orlov brothers. When Peter threatened to divorce her and lock her away, Catherine and her supporters decided to act. The Karmi and the government quickly swore allegiance to her. Peter was forced to abdicate. Catherine was now the sole ruler of Russia. But she had a problem what to do with her deposed husband. As long as he was alive, he was a threat, a potential figurehead for any counter-revolution. Then came the news of his death at Raptia. The story of a sudden fatal illness was the official line, but the timing was incredibly convenient. It solved Catherine's biggest political problem perfectly. The rumor that he was murdered began to spread immediately. The key piece of evidence is the supposed confession letter from Alexei Orlov. In it, he describes a drunken brawl that got out of hand. He claims they didn't mean to kill the emperor, but that it happened in the heat of the moment. The letter is a messy, semi-literate confession that paints the guards as incompetent drunks who accidentally killed their prisoner. But is the letter genuine? Many historians believe it is a forgery created later to make Catherine look innocent. If the murder was an unplanned accident, then she couldn't be blamed for it. It was just a tragic mistake made by her overzealous supporters. Whether the letter is real or not, it is almost certain that Peter III was murdered. An autopsy was performed, but the results were kept secret. Years later, when his coffin was opened, his neck was said to be bruised and discolored, suggesting strangulation. The story of the drunken brawl may have been a cover for a more deliberate, cold-blooded assassination. The big question is, did Catherine order it? There is no direct evidence that she did. She never wrote an order. She never confessed. In her memoirs, she presents herself as shocked and saddened by the news. She knew that the murder would tarnish her reputation. However, it is hard to believe she was completely ignorant. She was a shrewd political operator. She must have known that Peter's death was the only way to truly secure her throne. And her supporters, like the Orlovs, certainly knew it. They had put her on the throne, and their own futures depended on her staying there. They had every motive to remove Peter permanently. It's possible that Catherine gave a kind of unspoken permission. She may have let it be known that she wanted the problem of her husband to go away, and then left the messy details to her subordinates. This would give her plausible deniability. She could wring her hands in public while privately being relieved. She never punished the men who were with Peter when he died. In fact, Alexei Orlov went on to have a long and successful career as a naval commander. This leniency is highly suspicious. If she truly believed they had accidentally killed the former emperor, she would have had to make an example of them to show she was not involved. The fact that she protected them suggests she was, at the very least, complicit. The accusation of murder hung over Catherine for her entire reign. It was a dark stain on the beginning of what would be a long and glorious rule. She was an enlightened monarch, a patron of the arts and sciences, but her power was built on a foundation of a military coup and the suspicious death of her husband. She may not have mixed a poison or held a dagger, but the evidence is pretty damn convincing that she allowed the murder to happen. Number 6. Did a Swedish queen order a rival's death? In 1657, in a palace in Fontainebleau, France, a man named Gian Rinaldo Monaldeschi was executed. The order for his death was given by Christina, the former Queen of Sweden. And Christina had abdicated her throne 3 years earlier, but she still acted as if she had the power of life and death. Monaldeschi was her master of the horse, her chief courtier. She accused him of treason, of betraying her political secrets. She held a makeshift trial in her own apartments, condemned him to death, and had her servants carry out the sentence with swords. The execution was messy and brutal. Christina of Sweden is one of the most eccentric and fascinating figures of the 17th century. She was the daughter of the great warrior king Gustavus Adolphus. She was raised like a prince, highly intelligent and fluent in multiple languages. She refused to marry, abdicated her throne, converted to Catholicism, and spent the rest of her life traveling Europe as a kind of celebrity intellectual and political player. The execution of Monaldeschi is the most famous violent act associated with her. It was not a poisoning, it was a public, if irregular, execution. But it shows her belief in her own absolute authority, even without a kingdom. And it raises the question, if she was willing to have a man hacked to death in a French palace, what else was she capable of? And rumors of poison had followed Christina earlier in her life, back when she was still queen. The most notable case involves a French doctor and intellectual named Bourdelot. He became Christina's personal physician and a close confidant. He encouraged her to abandon her intense studies, which were damaging her health, and to enjoy life more parties, ballets, and leisure. Or her More serious advisors, particularly the Chancellor Axel Oxenstierna, despised Bourdelot. They saw him as a frivolous charlatan who was corrupting the queen. Suddenly, a plot was discovered to poison the queen. A man accused Bourdelot of being the mastermind. The evidence was flimsy and the whole affair seemed staged. Most historians believe that Christina's enemies, possibly Oxenstierna himself, invented the plot to discredit Bourdelot and get rid of him. They failed. Christina stood by her doctor and he remained in her favor. This episode is interesting because it shows how quickly accusations of poison could arise in a tense court environment. But the more intriguing question is whether Christina herself ever used such methods. After she abdicated, she still had political ambitions. She hoped to become the Queen of Naples, which was then under Spanish rule. This was a complex political game, and she needed allies and money. One of her rivals in the world of European politics was another powerful woman, Olympia Mancini, the niece of the powerful French minister Cardinal Mazarin. Olympia was also known for her political intrigues. Later in her life, she would be implicated in the affair of the poisons, a major scandal that rocked the French court of Louis XIV. Olympia was accused of poisoning her husband and other political rivals. She was eventually forced to flee France. While there is no direct evidence linking Christina to any poison plots, she moved in a world where such things were a constant reality. Her execution of Monaldeschi shows that she was not afraid to use violence to punish betrayal. She believed she had the right to do so. For a woman like Christina, who operated outside the normal rules of society, poison would have been a logical, if risky, tool. The rumors that swirled around her were a reflection of her unconventional and intimidating personality. She broke all the rules for what a queen should be, and in the minds of many, that made her capable of anything. Number 5, did an English queen conspire to kill her king? In 1327, King Edward II of England died a prisoner in Berkeley Castle. The official story was that he died of natural causes. But almost immediately, rumors began to circulate that he had been murdered in a particularly gruesome way. The men who ordered his imprisonment were his own wife, Isabella of France, and her lover, Roger Mortimer. They had led a successful invasion of England, deposed Edward, and now ruled the country in the name of Isabella's young son, Edward III. Isabella of France is often called the She-Wolf of France. She is remembered as the queen who overthrew her own husband. Her story is one of a marriage that turned from affection to bitter hatred. Edward II was a disastrous king. He was incompetent, lazy, and spent most of his time and money on his male favorites, first Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despenser. He neglected Isabella and humiliated her publicly. Isabella endured this for years, but when Edward sent her to her native France on a diplomatic mission, she saw her chance. She refused to come home. Instead, she took a lover, the exiled English nobleman Roger Mortimer, who was Edward's sworn enemy. And together they raised an army and invaded England. They were met with almost no resistance. The English people, fed up with Edward and the Despensers, welcomed them as liberators. And Edward II was captured and forced to abdicate. This left Isabella and Mortimer in a precarious position. They were ruling the country, but the deposed king was still alive. Like Catherine the Great's husband, the living Edward II was a potential rallying point for their enemies. As long as he was alive, their own power was insecure. Then came the news of his death. The story of his murder, though not involving poison, is so famous it's worth noting. The legend, which may have been later propaganda, is that he was killed by having a red hot poker inserted into his body, a method that would leave no external marks of violence. But were there rumors of poison? Yes. Some early chronicles suggest that his captors first tried to kill him through mistreatment and possibly poison. One story claims they tried to poison his food, but he had a strong constitution and survived. Another tells of how they kept him in a dungeon above a pit of rotting animal carcasses, hoping the foul air would make him sick and die. When these more subtle methods failed, they resorted to more direct violence. Isabella's role in all this is fiercely debated. Did she order her husband's death? Like Catherine the Great, there is no smoking gun, no written order. She was miles away when it happened. But it is almost impossible to believe she was unaware of the plot. She and Mortimer had the most to gain from Edward's death. It solidified their power and removed their greatest threat. The men who held Edward prisoner were Mortimer's loyal followers. They would not have acted without his approval. And Mortimer and Isabella were ruling together, their fates intertwined. A decision as momentous as killing the king would surely have been made by both of them. Isabella's story is a powerful example of how a queen pushed to the brink could seize power for herself. She used military force, political skill, and, in all likelihood, sanctioned the murder of her own husband. The rumors of poison attempts fit the pattern of trying to have him die in a way that could be explained as natural causes. It was a deniable death, the preferred method of rulers who wanted to remove a rival without looking like a tyrant. When that failed, a more brutal but equally deniable method was used. For 3 years, Isabella and Mortimer ruled England. But their reign was unpopular. When the young King Edward III came of age, he staged his own coup. He had Roger Mortimer arrested and executed for treason, including the murder of his father. What about his mother, Isabella? He showed her mercy. She was not punished, but she was removed from power and lived the rest of her life in comfortable retirement. Perhaps he knew that whatever she had done, she had been driven to it by the failures of his father. Number 4, did Olympia's mother of Alexander use more than ambition? Philip II of Macedon, the king who united Greece and built the army that his son would use to conquer the world, was assassinated in 336 BC. He was stabbed by one of his own bodyguards, a man named Pausanias. The murder took place in public at a celebration for his daughter's wedding. Pausanias was killed by other bodyguards as he tried to escape. The motive was officially a personal grudge, but many in the ancient world suspected a wider conspiracy, one that pointed directly to Philip's estranged wife, Olympias, and perhaps even to their son, the future Alexander the Great. Olympias was a princess from Epirus, a semi-barbaric kingdom on the edge of the Greek world. She was Philip's 4th wife, and she was a formidable and passionate woman. She was a devout follower of the mystery cult of Dionysus, a wild and ecstatic religion that involved handling snakes, something that unnerved the more conventional Macedonians. She was fiercely proud and ambitious, especially for her son Alexander. Her relationship with Philip was stormy. He was a polygamist who took several wives for political reasons. Olympias' position and Alexander's position as heir was threatened when Philip married a young Macedonian noblewoman named Cleopatra Eurydice. At the wedding banquet, Cleopatra's uncle made a toast, praying for a legitimate heir. Alexander, insulted, threw his cup at the man. Philip, drunk, drew his sword on his own son, but stumbled and fell. Alexander famously mocked him. Here is the man who is preparing to cross from Europe to Asia, and he cannot even cross from one couch to another. After this incident, Alexander and Olympias went into exile. They were eventually reconciled with Philip, but the tension remained. Philip now had a new wife who could potentially give him a full-blooded Macedonian heir, which would push Alexander the half-Epirote aside. Then Philip was assassinated. The timing was perfect for Olympias and Alexander. With Philip gone, Alexander was immediately hailed as the new king. All his potential rivals were eliminated. Olympias returned to Macedon in triumph. One of her first acts was to have Philip's last wife, Cleopatra Eurydice, and her infant child murdered. Some sources say she forced Cleopatra to hang herself after roasting her baby to death over a fire. This act, whether the details are true or not, shows her capacity for savage revenge. So, did she have Philip killed? The ancient sources are divided. The historian Justin, writing centuries later, explicitly names Olympias as the instigator of the plot. He claims she encouraged the assassin Pausanias and even provided the horses for his escape. The motive is certainly there. She had been publicly humiliated and feared being replaced. Her son's inheritance was at stake. The method was an assassin's dagger, not poison. But Olympias' reputation for ruthlessness and her association with witchcraft and snake charming made her a likely suspect in any kind of dark plot. She was seen as a woman who would use any means necessary to achieve her goals. After Alexander's death, Olympias continued to be a major player in the wars of his successors. She was just as Ruthless in her fight to secure the throne for her grandson, Alexander IV, she raised her own army and captured many of her rivals. She had Alexander the Great's half-brother, Philip III, and his wife Eurydice executed. She massacred hundreds of their supporters. Her career was soaked in blood. She was a true warrior queen. While the most famous murder she was accused of involved a knife, her later actions show a pattern of eliminating rivals without hesitation. In the chaotic world of Macedonian power politics, poison was surely in the arsenal of every major player. It is very likely that Olympias, a woman who never flinched from murder, would have used poison if it suited her purpose. Her reputation as a vengeful, semi-barbaric sorceress made her the perfect villain in the story of Philip's death. She was the ultimate ambitious mother, willing to kill a king to make her son the greatest conqueror the world had ever known. Number 3 was a queen's madness, a cover for conspiracy. In 1413, King Henry IV of England died, and his son became the famous Henry V. But Henry IV had a second wife, a stepmother to the new king, named Joan of Navarre. 6 years later, in 1419, Queen Joan was suddenly arrested. She was accused of witchcraft and sorcery, and of plotting to kill her stepson, King Henry V, through magical means. Her lands and money were confiscated, and she was imprisoned for 3 years. The primary tool of a witch was often believed to be poison. The story of Joan of Navarre is a strange and often overlooked one. She was a French princess who became Duchess of Brittany and then Queen of England. Her marriage to Henry IV was a political and financial match. By all accounts, their relationship was a good one. She also seems to have had a decent relationship with her stepchildren, including the future Henry V. So why was she suddenly accused of trying to kill him? The accusation came from a friar in her household who claimed she had been using sorcery to harm the king. At that time, the line between sorcery, astrology, and medicine was blurry. A person who made potions or powders could be seen as a healer, a sorcerer, or a poisoner, depending on the political climate. The accusation of using magic to harm the king was a serious charge of treason. The timing is the key. In 1419, Henry V was in the middle of a long and expensive war in France, the war that would lead to his great victory at Agincourt. Their wars are incredibly costly. The king was running out of money, and his stepmother, Queen Joan, was very, very wealthy. She had a large income from the lands granted to her as part of her marriage settlement. By accusing her of treason and witchcraft, the king's government had a legal pretext to seize all her assets. All her money, all her lands, all her income, it all went straight into the royal treasury to help fund the war in France. This looks less like a genuine fear of witchcraft and more like a cynical, politically motivated cash grab. The evidence against Joan was incredibly weak. The friar who accused her later confessed that he had made the whole thing up. But by then, it was too late. The accusation had served its purpose. The government had the, money it needed. Joan was never put on trial. This is also suspicious. If the king and his council truly believed she was a witch and a traitor trying to kill him, they would have held a public trial and executed her. Instead, she was held in a comfortable, if secure, confinement. After 3 years, just before Henry V's own death, he ordered her release and the restoration of all her property. This whole episode seems to be a case of a queen being used as a political scapegoat and a source of emergency funds. The charge of witchcraft, and by extension poisoning, was an easy one to level against a powerful and wealthy woman, especially one who was a foreigner. A French queen in the English court during a war with France was an easy target for suspicion. While Joan herself was almost certainly innocent, her case shows how the fear of poison and witchcraft could be weaponized. It was a tool that kings and governments could use to eliminate political opponents, seize their wealth, and rally public opinion. A whisper of poison could be more powerful than an army. For Joan of Navarre, that whisper cost her 3 years of her life and her entire fortune. Number 2, did a Norse queen's magic extend to poison? The Icelandic sagas tell of a powerful 10th century queen named Gunhild, the wife of King Erik Bloodaxe of Norway. She was known as Gunhild, Mother of Kings. The sagas, written centuries after her life, portray her as a powerful sorceress, a practitioner of the Norse magic known as cider. They claim she could shapeshift, control the weather, and curse her enemies. She was also depicted as a master of poison, using it to eliminate her rivals and secure power for her husband and sons. Gunhild is a figure who straddles the line between history and legend. She was a real person, a Danish princess who became Queen of Norway. Her husband, Eric, ruled briefly before being driven into exile by his half-brother Hakon the Good. Gunhild and Eric spent years as Viking rulers in the north of England. After Eric's death in battle, Gunhild returned to Denmark with her sons and spent the rest of her life plotting to reclaim the Norwegian throne for them. The sagas, particularly Eagle's Saga and Heimskringla, are our main sources for her life, and they are not friendly to her. They were often written from the perspective of Icelandic families who were her enemies. They paint her as a beautiful but evil and manipulative woman. One of the most famous stories involves Egil Skallagrimsson, the hero of Eagle's Saga. Gunhild hated Egil. She tried to have him killed several times. At one point, her servant offers Egil a drink of ale at a feast. Egil, suspicious, draws his knife and cuts his own hand, letting the blood drip into the drinking horn. He then carves magical runes on the horn and recites a spell. The horn shatters and the poisoned ale spills onto the floor. Gunhild's plot is foiled by Egil's own superior magic. In another story from Heimskringla, Gunhild is blamed for the death of her husband's rival, Hakon the Good. Although Hakon dies from a battle wound, the saga writer Snorri Sturluson implies that Gunhild's magic and curses played a role in his downfall. The sagas also claim she learned her magic from two Finnish wizards, whom she later had killed to keep their secrets. This fits the archetype of the evil sorceress who learns dark arts from a mysterious source. How much of this is real? It's impossible to say. The sagas are literature, not objective history. They are epic tales filled with heroes, villains, and supernatural events. Gunhild, as a powerful and foreign queen who was the enemy of many powerful Icelandic and Norwegian families, was the perfect villain. Accusing her of witchcraft and poisoning was a way to delegitimize her and her son's claim to the throne. It was a way of saying their power was not earned, but was the product of dark and unnatural forces. However, the belief in magic and curses was very real in the Viking Age, and poison was certainly a known weapon. It's plausible that Gunhild was a particularly ruthless and politically savvy woman who used every advantage she could. Her enemies may have interpreted her political skill and success as evidence of magic. A timely death of an opponent might not have been a coincidence. It must have been the result of one of Gunhild's curses or poisons. The story of Queen Gunhild is a powerful reminder that history is written by the victors, or at least by those who get to tell the story. For the Icelandic saga writers, Gunhild was the enemy, so they portrayed her as a poisoner and a witch. We will never know the truth, but the legend of the Dark Queen of Norway, who could shatter a drinking horn with a glance and kill a king with a whispered curse, is a compelling one. Number one, did a queen's loyalty extend to murder for hire? In the early 15th century, France was torn apart by a civil war between two factions of the royal family, the Armagnacs and the Burgundians. The king, Charles VI, suffered from bouts of severe mental illness, leaving a power vacuum. His wife, Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, found herself caught in the middle, trying to protect her children and the throne. She was accused by her enemies of corruption, greed, and of having affairs. She was also accused of being involved in political assassinations, the tool of choice in this brutal conflict. Isabeau of Bavaria's life was a tragedy. She came to France as a young, celebrated beauty to marry the king. But her husband's descent into madness shattered her world. One day, he would be a loving husband, and king the next, he would not recognize her and would fly into violent rages. This left the government in chaos. The king's brother, Louis of Orleans, and his cousin, John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy, battled for control of the kingdom. Isabeau initially sided with Louis of Orleans. They were rumored to be lovers, though this was likely propaganda spread by the Burgundians. In 1407, Louis of Orleans was brutally assassinated in the streets of Paris. He was ambushed and hacked to death by masked men. The man who ordered the murder was John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy. He openly admitted it, claiming it was a justifiable act of tyrannicide. This murder plunged France deeper into civil war. Isabeau, now fearing the Duke of Burgundy, found herself in a desperate position. The accusations against her intensified. Her Burgundian enemies painted her as a greedy, foreign queen who was bankrupting the kingdom with her lavish lifestyle. While there are no specific, famous accusations of Isabeau using poison herself, she was the head of a political faction that certainly did use assassination. The war between the Armagnacs and Burgundians was characterized by treachery and murder. Leaders on both sides were eliminated. 12 years after he murdered Louis of Orleans, John the Fearless was himself assassinated. He was lured to a meeting on a bridge to negotiate a peace treaty with the Dauphin, Isabeau's son, Charles. As he knelt to pledge his loyalty, he was attacked and killed by the Dauphin's men. Did Isabeau have a hand in this? She had every reason to want John the Fearless dead. He had murdered her ally, seized power, and slandered her name. His death was revenge and a political necessity for her and her son's faction. As queen, even with her limited power, she would have been part of the inner circle where such a plot was hatched. Isabeau's story is not one of a queen personally mixing a potion. It's the story of a queen trapped in a political snake pit where assassination was just another form of policy. She was the head of a government and a family that used murder to achieve its goals. In this context, her personal guilt is almost irrelevant. She was part of a system where rivals were eliminated, whether it was done with a sword on a bridge or with a drop of poison in a cup of wine. The result was the same. Her reputation was destroyed by propaganda. She was blamed for the Civil War, for the English invasion led by Henry V, and for disinheriting her own son in the treaty that followed. She was portrayed as the worst kind of queen, selfish, treacherous, and unpatriotic in a world of such brutal, open violence. Secret plots involving poison were assumed to be happening all the time. As one of the most powerful and most hated women in France, Isabeau of Bavaria was inevitably seen as a player in that secret, deadly game.